Hey guys, today we're going to be talking with Michael Mullen, who is a project manager at a virtual reality company. We talk about project management, what it kind of entails. A lot of people don't really know how important project managers are, or the fact that you can make six figures as a project manager. A lot of people think it's just developers. It's not the case in the workplace. We talk about ticketing systems. We talk about the Agile principles, what that entails. We talked about boot camps a little bit. He happened to go to an online one. A little bit about hackathons, a little bit of everything. I know Michael from a hackathon we met through a mutual friend. Really cool guy, really nice. I really had a lot of time talking to him, which is why this went on a little bit longer than the other ones. But I hope you guys enjoy it, and don't forget to like and share. Thanks for watching.
Code everything.
Yeah. Gone any hackathons lately, by the way?
No, I haven't been to any since that one we were at last time. I haven't really had time to. So no, I haven't done another one.
I've been trying myself to go to a few, but there's so few that aren't for college students only. At least in the Florida area.
Oh, really? Huh?
Yeah.
Can you hear me okay? By the way, is it too echoey, or is this okay?
No, it's actually pretty good. You wouldn't believe some of the bullshit mics people have that they do these things with. Would you mind introducing yourself and what you currently do?
Sure, of course. So my name is Michael Mullen, and I am a associate producer for games and interactive. And part of that is, or sort of the central role to that, is project management. And work for a company called Within, and we make all kinds of VR content, mostly VR film. The company used to be called Verse, and so if you look them up, done a lot of really cool stuff for the New York Times and Mr. Robot and all kinds of stuff. But this is the first interactive project the company has taken on. So this team that I'm on has been built up over the last 4 or 5 months to carry that out.
Now, how exactly did you get into project management? Because I'm looking at your LinkedIn, and it seems like you have a heavy, the bulk of your experience, I would say, is in writing and in that general direction.
Yeah, for sure. So it's been a very winding path for me, and because for many years I was a journalist, and I worked as a writer and an editor, and then did some video producing and writing and directing and stuff. But a few years back, I mean, for one thing, journalism has really tanked, and it's a very hard field to make a living, and so that's part of it. But also, if you do something for too long, you get bored. So a few years ago, I was looking around, and this games space was growing so much, and I was really curious about how to get into it. But I mean, anybody who's tried to get a job in games will tell you how tough it is, even if they're, straight out of college or older or whatever. It's just really competitive. But a few years back, a guy that I know was starting up a games division at a company, and he needed a publishing producer. And so he gave me a shot. I jumped in, and that's when I really started trying to learn the tech side of things, because I realized it's crazy to try to be a producer on games when you're the only guy in the room who doesn't know anything about what's under the hood, Yeah. So that's when I started taking some courses and stuff, and learning to code, and so that's how I got started. And then, this is my second gig in games and interactive, and as far as the project management side of it, I had done some of that as a publishing producer, but not managing like an on-site, engineering art team. This time it's different. Again, I got hired, somebody who thought like, well, I had the right attitude and life experience, even though I wasn't like a, supremely qualified project manager. And so, this is my second time doing this, but the first time that I've really been, tossed into the into the flames. So
nice. I see here that you say you're trying to build out your software skills and development skills, and I know you were doing free code camp because we've talked about that. Did that really help you get started in it?
Free code camp specifically, or you mean?
Yeah, free code camp, because then I see you either went to or you're going to Block. Which
I did go to Block. Yeah. So I initially was doing what everybody does who wades into code, just like Code Academy and Code School and different courses, books and whatnot. So I wanted to put some structure around that. So I signed up for Block, and I mean, that was super helpful for me because it created a structure and helped me start learning. I mean, I'm definitely not a front end developer. I don't necessarily aspire to be one, but what I was doing before, we did a lot of online games, a lot of web-based stuff. I was super interested in WebGL and the technology for building really beautiful stuff on the web. It's still obviously really nascent, but it was super exciting. So it made sense for me to start learning JavaScript and frameworks like like 3JS and such. So I did Block. I have very mixed feelings. That's probably another longer conversation. But as far as boot camps go, the one that I went to was not as expensive as some. But if anybody who goes into a boot camp and they don't know that much code, and they think that they're going to come out the other end at 12 weeks or 36 weeks as a fully fledged developer is absolutely crazy, because it's not going to happen. The people who do that are people who already maybe knew a language before they went to the boot camp or already had experience. But if that's kind of you early on, you're going to have to spend at least another year or two, like really, really, grinding on the code to have a shot at, I think, at being a viable developer. So.
did you do the web developer course or the software engineer course?
Front end developer.
Front end developer.
Yeah.
I'm looking at it right now, and I get a lot of questions.
Yeah.
Hopefully we could dive into this a little bit if you don't mind.
Of course.
But so Block is, as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, is kind of a fully online part-time boot camp, and you choose what sort of how many hours a week you're going to do as well. Is that right?
Well, I don't know. It's possible that they've even changed it again, but the way it worked when I was doing it was you could do it either 12 weeks, 24, or 36 weeks. And so, the price is the same. It's just that you get, it's either you get with your mentor once, twice, or 3 times a week, right? So it's just like you're stretching it out. And to me, I did 36 weeks. For one thing, I was working full time. And I also realized that, learning to code is 90% of it is how much effort you put into it on your own, regardless of who's helping you. So if you did 40, even if you weren't working 40 hours a week for 12 weeks, at least the way my brain works, I can't jam that much knowledge into my brain. And besides, you're not memorizing, you're changing the shape of your brain to make this stuff work, understand the mechanics of code, learning this whole different way of thinking. So in 12 weeks, you can't rewrite your circuitry that fast, And even 36 weeks, at the end of it, I realized that I was, like I say, I was just starting at that stage. I was still a little baby. So that's the way it worked when I was going there.
And that's a good point of what you bring up. I've said it quite a few times as well, is that when you really become a developer, it's not that you learn JavaScript, you learn Ruby or whatever it is. It's that you learn to think like a programmer and you learn to problem solve.
Yeah, I think Linus Torvald, his quote, one thing he said was that, a poor developer focuses on the language, a good developer focuses on the data structures. And I've like right now I'm working on C# because we work in Unity, and you can do JavaScript in Unity, but obviously nobody does. So right now I'm more focused on C#, but you do realize, the patterns are the same. There's going to be a for loop. So it's definitely not about the language. It's definitely about learning the principles behind it. Yeah.
Nice. Now, could you kind of walk us through what maybe a day in the life of, and I get this question asked all the time, and it depends on the day, right? But a day in life of a project manager.
Yeah. For sure. It's a little crazy. A day in the life right now for me is like 12 hours of being in the office and like buying food and picking up food and making coffee and all that kind of stuff because, we're a tiny team. And so it's a little crazy, but if I kind of rewind a bit to before we were this close to release, basically, so we use Jira and kind of a loose form of Scrum to manage the project. So Jira is definitely the core of that. Let's say you come in the morning, ideally you would have a very good idea of what the top priorities are, as far as this person's working on this piece, this person's working on this piece. And then you would go and talk to people. We don't do stand-ups every day. Mm-hmm. What I would do is go to the individuals and say, hey, what are you working on? How long is that going to take? Is anything blocking you? I mean, these are the basics of Scrum, right? If somebody says, oh yeah, I'm working on this piece of art, but I need this model from this person, I didn't receive it, and then I know that person was supposed to deliver it the day before, I go to that person and say, hey, did you deliver this? And it's really sort of expediting and just making sure people have what they need. And then beyond that, it's a ton of meetings with different vendors and developers, people who are creating software, like the most mundane things like scheduling these meetings, making sure the meetings happen, doing tons of research. And then one thing about it for me is that like, for instance, if you have a project like the one that I'm on, you might have, at one stage we had like 600 tickets open or in the backlog, right? And then some huge number in the current sprint. And so every single day you have to kind of get the entire project into your brain, and you have to sort of do that again every single day. When you've got 600 tickets in there and all these epics and all these different moving pieces, you never just go, okay, I know where everything is, I'm cool, I can just like put my feet up on my desk. It's like every single day you have to kind of reload that project into your brain, right? Because there's always something slipping, does that make sense? Like, for example, someone's given a task, like, okay, you're going to create this piece. And you say, how long is it going to take? And they say it's going to take 4 days. And you go, great. And you mark that 4 days. You go on to something else. And, you don't look back because you know that this person is smart and able and well-trained. And then suddenly, you look back and you realize that this 4-day task has taken 2 weeks, right? And that's the kind of thing that will definitely kill a project. And so it's like, first of all, trying to make sure that doesn't happen, but it's going to happen. And when it does, just dealing with it, not laying blame, not starting a fire drill, but just constantly going back and revisiting those things to make sure that nothing slips.
Now, if somebody wanted to get into a lot of people, especially young people who are becoming developers, they just think it's like, look, you're a developer, you're nothing, but there's so many more roles, and sort of, maybe you're in design, UX, UI, project management. So what would your advice be for somebody who might want to start going down the project management route? Is there any particular things they should look for or study up on?
Yeah, absolutely. By the way, and as an aside, I mean, I'm not at the place right now where I could jump in and say, hey, I'm even like a junior Unity developer. So for me, this is perfect because I have to work really hard and handle a lot of moving parts, but at the same time, I work directly with these engineers. I study code. Of course, I understand things like Git, and I know how to work with Bitbucket. So I don't have to go to an engineer and say, hey, can you go pull this branch for me so that we can look at this piece and iterate on it? And so, there's no limit to how much I can learn, how much I can help them. And of course, they appreciate that. So, it is a good way to move deeper into some other technical role because you're working directly with these guys. And the more that you help them, the more that they appreciate it. So that's the other side of it. It is a good way into other tech roles. Now, as far as project management, I mean, it's definitely very, very useful to learn something like Scrum. And you can, I haven't done it yet, but you can get your Scrum Master certification. It's not cheap. It's like $1,000 for a 2-day course. But if you've got the money, that's something you can do to put that on your resume. There's a book by the guy who created Scrum called I believe it's called How to Do Twice the Work in Half the Time. First of all, it's a great book. And, most of this is not about being a master of the ins and outs of Jira. It's more about understanding the principles of continuous improvement and Kaizen, as the Japanese call it. And these principles are the things that are super, super important in DevOps, in game development. So that's the first thing, just learning about the principles behind it so you can have an intelligent conversation about it.
Now, I didn't realize this was a thing until I did a little bit of research, but there are boot camps like General Assembly that actually it's all product management, like boot camp. Is this something you ever thought about maybe diving into, or you have any opinions about it?
To me, that sounds like a gigantic waste of time, to be quite honest. And I mean, I know people have, definitely, though, again, to go back, anybody who's thinking about going to any code camp, like boot camp, do the research, read the articles on Medium, find out what's happening in the industry, because I'm certainly not the first one to say this, but everybody wants either a mid-level or an experienced engineer. And if you're coming in and you're a junior engineer and you have no work experience and you go somewhere like General Assembly or Block, you're probably not going to just get snapped up right away because the market's kind of been flooded with these sort of beginners. So I would say, let's say that for the sake of argument that General Assembly is a great school. I mean, I've seen the portfolios of their students, and I know that people coming out are pretty green. But the benefit of one of these code camps where you're actually learning to code is that that's a hard skill, right? If you can code in JavaScript, if you can work in React and Angular, then that's in demand. There's only so many people who can do that. But if you were to spend thousands of dollars and to come out and say, now I'm a project or a product manager, that you don't need it. I mean, you can learn that stuff. You need to learn that stuff on the job, I think. And if you're bright and you're well educated, or let's say you're bright and you're really ready to work hard, I think you can land one of those jobs if you're persistent. I would say do not waste your money on a school that's allegedly training you those skills, because 90% of that you're going to learn on the job.
Yeah, that's kind of my feeling for this, because it's like
learn JavaScript, kids.
Yeah, and it's kind of like the proof is in the pudding, right? Like you're a project manager, you're learning software on top of it, and that makes you more valuable. And it's all about like how many tools can you have that your employers, it may not even necessarily be directly related to your job, but when the time comes where they need those tools, they know you have it and you're that much more valuable.
Yeah. I mean, for this job, when I interviewed for this job, I knew how to speak the language. I mean, I didn't know how to do that 2 years ago. I didn't know what any of this stuff was. Again, just understanding command line and Git and Bitbucket and being really, really comfortable with the tools and knowing what an SSH key is, and understanding. Even if you're in the middle of a discussion and people start talking about integrating a piece of software into the project, or how the Unity interface works, these are all things that you can get a basic understanding very fast. But when you very first start out, it's super, super, super intimidating. And so if you say went to a boot camp and just to get through it, you were forced to learn all these things. Like what's a Boolean, right? I remember the first time I came across that, and then you start Googling it and you're like, this is confusing. Or what's a floating point? Your anxiety is going to decrease a huge amount just by understanding all this stuff. And people are going to be more comfortable with you if they know that you're not just completely blindsided every conversation. Because you can't manage a bunch of engineers if you never know what they're talking about. So
yeah, they'll just bullshit you and be like, yeah, this is a 3-week project.
Right. Well, that was honestly what got me into it, into studying this stuff in the first place, because I was working as a publishing producer, and I was managing from my company's end, and we're building mobile apps, and that's exactly right. We would have a Unity developer, and they would, we'd be working on a slash and hack, app, and we would say, well, we want these swords to really hit the body of the other player, and they'd be like, well, that's real physics, and that's beyond the scope of this project. Well, you've got to be able to know, are they telling the truth or not? You're like, I know what the budget on the project is. I know how much time we have. And if they say, well, we can it's just a timed game. It's not going to be real physics. And you don't know if they're telling the truth or not, then you're in big trouble, because they're going to spot that right away, so.
So I personally think like virtual reality is kind of the future and going to be great for gaming and things like that. Are you guys working with any sort of hardware specific to your like virtual reality movies or games, like HoloLens, or is it just kind of like what is the hardware requirements that will be needed?
Well, we're launching at Sundance in a few days, and we're going to be on the Vive initially, and then beyond that, it's going to I don't know what else is going to be, but that's what we're working with right now. Vive is a great headset. It's very high end.
I had the chance to test it at a YouTube Space meetup, and it was phenomenal.
It really is
phenomenal.
It's mind blowing, and it's really exciting to see how people react to this, because we spend the whole day in the headset, but people try this for the first time, and they really have their minds blown. And so yeah, long term, it's very exciting. I'm a strong believer in augmented reality, mixed reality, which most people who are developers really are, because there's only so much time you can spend in the headset. It's now I know people who play some games and they say they've stayed in there for hours at a time, but when you got those lenses a couple inches in front of your face, your eyes aren't designed to work that way. And you tend to get kind of freaked out pretty quickly. So I think that augmented reality is going to be the way forward. But in the meantime, we're just developing and experimenting. Everything we do is R&D, and that's, again, project management. I think probably the way I describe it makes it sound horrible, but it depends on the project. If we were building a vacuum cleaner, I would probably be extremely bored, depending on the vacuum cleaner. But when you're working on this cutting edge technology with these people who are amazing developers and also tech artists, thing like that, who their paintbrushes, their code, it's super, super exciting. And to be a part of that is amazing. So, it can be a super, super fun job depending on the product that you're building.
And just to talk about augmented reality, for those of you who have not had a chance to try the Microsoft HoloLens, I think it's like $3,000 for a developer kit. So most people haven't, but it really does make you feel like you are in the future. I absolutely love it.
It's cool. The only limitation is that the computer is actually in the headset. So it's, with the Vive, for instance, you're jacked into a super powerful, the min spec for a machine that you're using with Vive is like, we've got 1080s and i7s and top of the line stuff. So you're depending on a super powerful computer, so you can do great stuff, and you've got this great field of view. The HoloLens is this tiny little computer, so But you're absolutely correct, because the objects you're interacting with are actually in the space. And that's the sort of experience that science fiction writers and computer scientists and designers have been drooling over for decades. So like this idea of mixing virtual objects and real objects. So yeah, I agree with you. I think that's really the exciting stuff.
Let's see here. So I'm just pulling up your LinkedIn real quick. Is there anything like core principles of project management we didn't kind of cover? I know we talked about like a day in the life.
Yeah. I mean, it really is about there are so many different things, and a lot of these are life lessons. It's about being a servant, like a servant leader. That's one of the ideas. It's really, there's another book called, I think, Toyota Kata, and a lot of these principles come from Toyota, and the idea of continuous improvement. This idea that, as Bob Dylan said, he was not busy living is busy dying. And it's a law of the universe that if you're not working the muscle, then the muscle is atrophying. And that goes for your brain, that goes for your organization. So, we're not talking about coming up with these big lists of we've got to increase sales by 70% and we've got to steal 30% of the market share. Continuous improvement is about making tiny, tiny, tiny improvements. And it sounds like a waste of time, but it does get exponential benefit. It gains an exponential benefit. And Toyota has proved that through their success. And, it's like on a personal level, if you're not saving any money, 10 years later, you still have $2 in your bank account. But if you said, what if I just took the change from my coffee? And there are apps that do this now. What if I take the change from my coffee and I just put that money away and I never touch it, and that money starts to grow? And 10 years later, you actually have a nice nest egg. It's the same thing, try like losing weight. Like, what if I took a 10-minute walk? And pretty soon that 10-minute walk can be a 30-minute walk. And it's this exact same thing with the organization, where you have a process of developing something, and you look at that process and you don't try to revolutionize the whole thing. You say, how can I fix one little thing? And there are tons of different ways to do that, like asking small questions, like, what can I do today to make this a little bit better, and those are the things, and people see that you have that attitude, and then that attitude is also contagious. I don't want to sound like a self-help author, but it really does work. If you're busy trying to improve a little bit, then chances are you'll help other people do that. Whereas if you're just kind of sitting there being like, oh, another day, another dollar, then other people are going to sense that as well. And if you're the project manager, you're touching every single point. And so, a friend of mine who is a developer was telling me about his project manager. And I think the project manager is completely overwhelmed because they have him managing like 6 or 7 projects. Well, what happens then is he's not managing any projects. What they do is they have a call once a week, and he says, and they have developers all over the world. And so he has an hour. And so he goes, okay, this ticket, it says that you're, writing this piece of code. Okay, what is this? And they tell him what it is. And then he says, okay, so we're going to move that to in process. Okay, now this ticket. And he asks them what the ticket is. Well, they could do that themselves. The project manager needs to understand what every single one of those tickets is, what it means, how it fits in, right? Otherwise, everybody's going to be like, oh, this guy's a joker and he's just wasting our time, So I guess that's the next principle I would mention. And the creators of Scrum would freely admit that project management is bad. And the reason it's bad is because when people are talking about the project, they're not working on the project, right? So what you try to do is find the least bad project management tool, right? The least intrusive, the least disruptive. And so, I think Jira is pretty good at that. Though on the other hand, like some artists, for instance, that I work with, they get stressed out by looking at this software with all these little buttons and all these little tickets, and it's just not, it's not pretty, it's not fun, it's not cool. So you do have to know who feels that way, and don't get stressed out about it, and just handle their tickets for them, talk to them, get them to verbalize what's going on, and then you handle their tickets. And you don't browbeat people. You never go to people and say, hey, you should have moved that ticket over to done or in progress. Why didn't you do that? Hey man, you got to move your tickets. You got to look at your ticket, because then people are just going to hate you, right? So you have to know when to also get out of the way. I think is a crucial thing. The project manager should not be the one garnering all the attention. You should be the one who's only interrupting when you have to, and the rest of the time you just get out of the way and let people do what they need to do.
Nice. Yeah, and one thing about so a lot of times people are just they have this mindset again that you're either a developer and you're making money and every other job doesn't, but you can make good money as a project manager. I just looked it up on Glassdoor. The national average salary for a project manager is $91,000.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's a key role, and being a good project manager is really, really, really hard. And I've learned that, and not saying that because I am one. I mean, you are confronted with your own weaknesses constantly, and other people are going to see your weaknesses too, because if anything fails, if anything slips, if anything misses the deadline, then it always comes back to you. Right? And the positive side of that is you can avert disaster. You can get a project in, twice as fast, and hopefully make sure people don't work 20 hours a day. So a good project manager is a heroic figure. And I think that organizations, especially tech companies, absolutely recognize that. And, the problem with being a developer, again, is that the people at the lower end of that, I think, have a really, really hard time getting those jobs. Now, the people at the top, of course, make vast sums of money, and so it's like trying to get into the NBA. People have their eyes on the dollar signs, which who doesn't, But at the same time, if it's going to take you 10 years to get to be one of those guys who's making, deep into the six figures, then yeah, I mean, $91,000, nobody would sneeze at that. I mean, that's a really good salary. And if you can use that as a door to get into incredible organizations.
Yeah, and that's really another great point, is that a lot of times people think they're just going to jump into a developer role straight out of college, or more than likely you're going to have to maybe do QA. You're going to, like my last job, I worked as a technology trainer, which I basically worked at a software company, and I kind of almost had a project management role at times, and it was not, but I definitely was a developer by any stretch of the means, and now I am. And so sometimes these roles that you may find out you like this much better than actually being a developer. Right.
Well, the problem that I have is, and the thing that for my personal continuous improvement, I know that I'm not going to be happy until I understand every single element of how to, like in the example of games, every single element of how to build a game. If I can't go in there and read the code and understand it. Now, there are people who do crazy things, and maybe they're the only one who understands what they do, because they're playing at such a high level. No one understands what they're doing. And I think that when this thing we're working on comes out, people will see it and understand that these guys are kind of legendary. Maybe I'll never get to that level, but I need to know C#. I need to know how to code in C#. I need to understand Unity and how to build things. And I think ultimately that's just the way I am. It's going to drive me crazy if I'm always just a guy with Jira asking people when something's done, right? But you're absolutely right. I know people who have said that like, people who are very, very successful in the games industry, who say like, I'm not a coder. They'll say like, and not just games, other tech fields, where people will say, yeah, I'm like everybody else. Everybody's talking about how you got to learn to code, and they took a JavaScript course, and they took a JavaScript course for 10 minutes because they were like, this is not for me. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Not everybody's going to become a coder, but if you do have that itch, then you cannot stop halfway. You have to go all the way with it, even if it takes a while. But yeah, there's plenty of you have to be honest with yourself. You can't say only coders are geniuses and I want to be one of them. If you hate it, you're never going to be a developer. It's like people who go, countless people who go to law school, and then 5 years into law they say, wow, this is horrible. They go sell real estate or whatever.
And I mean, that's a realistic thing too, because I'm part of several Facebook coding groups. I see all the time someone saying, look, I just spent $12,000-$15,000 on a boot camp. I coded 1 month before I graduate. Turns out I hate this shit, but I need to get a job. What do I do? And it's like, look, man, 70% of people hate their jobs. Don't be that statistic.
Yeah.
Go do something else. Just eat the cost.
It's true, man. It's true. I mean, and I guess it's more and more tempting because there's so much anxiety around work, and automation is affecting white collar workers now, like it has affected blue collar workers for many years. My wife's a translator, and look at what's happening with machine learning. People like translators who are highly trained are being automated out of jobs, and so people are getting squeezed into these fields where it looks like there's still going to be growth, which is going to be either medical field or tech, but as you say, there are also being a coder is not the only thing you can do. And the good thing about, this recently Amazon's saying they're going to hire 100,000 people. Well, guess what? Most of the jobs at Amazon are not coders. Many of them are, but many of them aren't. A lot of the jobs at Google aren't coders. So I think that's the upside to having spent that money. Maybe they hate being a coder, but again, if they know how to speak the language, then that's really going to help getting into the tech field. Again, my wife as a translator, localization is huge in tech, in games, and so that's what she's pushing to get into because there's just huge growth there. Even if I don't think she's ever going to be a coder. So, in
the spirit of Scrum, real quick, hey guys, we'll be taking questions at the end. So in the next 5 minutes or so, let me type this out. In the spirit of Scrum, and God, I'm forgetting the name of it. It's been a while. We don't really follow stand up and all that at my work because we're such a small team, but
right.
my last work did. So in terms of project management, what goes well with project management? What doesn't go well in terms of learning? What's a good way to learn project management? What's a good way not to learn project management? And how can one improve themselves to become a project manager?
Right. Well, first of all, the book that I mentioned, How to Do Twice the Work in Half the Time, highly recommend it. Read it. We have a producer we're training, and I bought her a copy of the book. I was like, read this book. There's a bunch of books on Kaizen. It's Japanese. It's Kaizen. I think there's one called The Kaizen Way. Definitely read it. Read everything you can about Toyota. There's tons of books about how they've done things over the years. There's another book called The Goal, and then there's one called The Phoenix Project. And, read all this stuff. Definitely there's courses on Udemy about Jira, about Scrum. And I definitely want to stress that it's not because these are, techie things to do. These are ways to short circuit a lot of the bad habits that creep into projects. Every team is a dysfunctional family. You're dealing with personalities. You're dealing with a bunch of people, and really, that's what you're going to be confronted with constantly. You can learn all this other stuff, all the principles, but can't be an asshole, right? Can't be a dick. You have to be a servant leader. You have to you have to understand people. You know, it's like, why do bands break up? You know, because everybody has their own agenda. Everybody has their own personality. Everybody gets their feelings hurt. You can be dealing with the most hard-bitten, experienced engineers, and you're just dealing with a bunch of personalities, right? So it really does also come down to your emotional intelligence, you know, as cheesy as that sounds. And if you're a jerk, you're going to make everybody miserable. So, and that's why a lot of it is just learning it on the job, and why going to General Assembly and learning this stuff is not going to help you, right? So
here's a question from Scott Silva.
Okay.
Just for someone who's, you know, they're new, they may not be familiar with how Agile and Scrum are kind of related. Would you kind of give a brief explanation of that?
Sure. So Agile, I guess, is the kind of like, you know, is a kind of a way to describe it. Scrum is one specific set of like rules to implement this. The Kanban is the Japanese, you know, sort of variant. I guess actually Scrum is a variant on Kanban. But basically all it is, you know, imagine that you have a whiteboard up on the wall, and you have sticky notes, and you have, here are the things that we need to do this week. Here are the things that are in progress, and then here are the things that are done. And so what you do is you try to keep these teams very small, right? And so you figure out what the velocity of the team is. Now, again, here we do this very loosely, and I hope to make it better and better all the time. But the idea is, I understand exactly how much, you know, after a few weeks or a few months, you know exactly how much work your team can get done in a week. So at the beginning of that week, you sit down and go, hey, I've got this really big piece of work. Who can handle this? And somebody goes, yep, I can do that. And you go, that's going to take him all week. Great. I know exactly how long it's going to take him to do that. You give somebody else one that is going to take them 2 days, and another one that's going to take them 2 days. So that's 4 days of their week. So basically, it's like putting together a big puzzle of the week, and people are committing to get that work done, right? But they're also committing to tell you if, hey, I thought I could get this done, but I've been blocked by this other thing. And so what can we do to get past that block, right? And then, you know, to go back to the example of Toyota, the very famous example, the Japanese at Toyota, what they would do is, you know, like say like at Mercedes-Benz, what they would do is they would put their cars through the assembly line, and then at the end of the process, at the end of the assembly, the car's done, they'd have all these guys in white coats come around and test everything on the car, and then if something was broken, they would fix it. What the Japanese would do at Toyota, anybody on the assembly line can stop that assembly line. Any lowly employee who like turns a screw can stop that assembly line. And it sounds horribly disruptive, but it actually works, because what happens is I discover a problem with the door assembly. I stop the assembly line. Everybody around me stops what they're doing and goes, hey, what's the problem? And you go, hey, I need your help holding up this door while I turn this screw. Everybody pitches in, they fix it, assembly line starts up, and it keeps going. So basically, when you have a problem, you fix it immediately, instead of waiting till the end and then going, oops, we got all these problems, and the whole project collapses. So anyway, I know it's sort of chasing a tangent there, but that's Scrum, is this idea, same thing as Kanban. You're taking things from to do over to done, and you're also figuring out like the velocity of the team, how much you can get done in the sprint, whether that's 1 week or 2 weeks.
And just to elaborate a little bit, we've talked about Jira a couple times, and some people may not be familiar with that. But Jira is basically part of Atlassian suite, and it's essentially a ticketing system to help facilitate your Agile practices and Scrum practices as well, guys.
Yeah, and it's an industry standard tool. So anybody who's curious about that, you know, sign up for Atlassian, do an example project, fool around with it. You know, it's like, I mean, it can be configured in many, many different ways. But like I say, also, if you really want to try to get a job in this, go on Udemy and spend $10 and get one of those Jira courses. It's going to put you to sleep. I mean, I guarantee it's also a sleep aid. So if you're an insomniac, that's good for you. But you know, just check it out. You'll immediately see that there's nothing complicated about it. Now, there's a lot of things you can do if you drill down that is more complicated, but that doesn't matter. It's just like moving tickets from left to right. It's very, very simple.
So earlier you mentioned that it sounds like in a couple of days you have a deadline coming up.
Yeah.
Is overtime, I guess this is directed at both of us, is overtime pretty common at your workplace in general, or in the tech field in general, in your experience?
Yeah, it depends on where you are, but you know, the games industry is obviously notorious for this. They even have a term for it. They call it crunch. Anybody who works in games or reads about game development knows this term. And crunch is when you get closer to deadline and then everything goes out the window and you just start working these crazy hours. You know, we're in crunch right now because we're launching at Sundance. You know, we're literally flying out on Monday and we're finishing this project. And anybody who's worked on a development project knows it's never done because there's always something left to do. There's always some bug. There's always some feature that somebody wants in, and you're making these really tough decisions of, do we get it in? Do we not get it in? If we get it in, it risks bugging something else, and then the whole thing could crash. And so it's this incredible, really hair-raising balancing act. But, you know, I definitely, as a developer, everything is like, it's like this, an inverted pyramid, basically. And everything is, or a funnel rather, right? And everybody is dumping all this stuff into the funnel. And the developer is at the bottom of that funnel with his mouth open, just like, you know, everything's coming in. The developers have to be the ones who implement every feature that other people want. That could be the marketing people. That could be the president of the company. That could be, you know, ultimately it's the project manager saying, hey, look, everybody's saying, well, we got to get this in. We got to get this in, right? So I think that's why developers get the big bucks, and that's why they end up staying later, because, you know, your job is never done. There's always some bug lurking in there. There's always some edge case that you didn't think about. There's always some other test to be written. So I think, yeah, I think overtime is pretty normal.
Yeah, and in my limited experience as a developer, I've only been a developer for a little over 3 months, but in my experience is, when it comes to deadlines, you better be ready to work some overtime if you don't have a working product or you don't have it to the standards you need it to be.
Right.
With that being said, it also depends on the company environment, right? Like, are they okay with you working your standards just because you are salary employees at that time? So it's, you know, we all know that S in salary stands for slavery. No, it's but
and my philosophy, I mean, I come in and as a project manager, even as a producer, even if somebody completely took over the project management role, part of continuous improvement. A lot of time in games, people kind of take crunch as like a badge of honor, like, oh man, we're in crunch, and they do that because it sounds like, oh, it makes you sound tough and cool. But my goal is to decrease that crunch as much as possible, because the tireder people get, the more mistakes they make, and you know, you can't write good code when you've been working for 15 hours. I mean, it's just humanly impossible. So I think decreasing that should be central to any producer's job, any project manager's job, for sure.
Which is the exact reason that you have tools like Jira and
Yeah.
you know, Scrum, so that you can make sure that let's try and get things done as efficiently as possible, so that when it does come crunch time, it's a little less than it needs to be.
Right, and your most valuable assets are the ones that people tend to overuse, right? If you have somebody and you know they're a great coder, well, then you're going to dump everything on their plate, and that person's going to get burnt out, and they can always go work somewhere else. So one of the really important principles, and you know that book I mentioned, The Goal, which is about industrial work, and everybody reads this in business school, but everybody should read it, is that you protect your bottlenecks, you protect your most valuable resources. And that sounds counterintuitive, because you'd be like, well, if he's the best coder, you're definitely going to give him the most important tasks. But you just make sure that you keep that that person from getting overexploited so that every single feature that somebody wants doesn't get dumped on that person's plate. Make sure that that person gets plenty of sleep, because you want them to be viable in the long term. You want that person to be happy. You don't want them to be miserable.
Especially as a developer, where, you know, it's one of the few jobs where just myself started working. I get job offers. I'm not looking for work. I can only imagine you start stressing out your developers a little bit too much, and they are the godly developer there. They have options, and so it's a balancing act.
Yeah, they have tons of options, and yeah, you want them to be. I mean, part of obviously any good developer, they're going to stay somewhere where they're getting to work on exciting stuff, right? So even if there's crunch, even if, God forbid, someone's managing poorly or there's drama or unfair demands, whatever. If that person's working on like really exciting problems, they're going to stick around probably, because most jobs are just, they're just making license plates. They're just doing really boring tasks. So if you give them some impossible task, like I say, majority of what we do is R&D. Well, any developer is going to jump on that because it's super exciting. It's VR. It's never been done before. So they go crazy for this stuff. So there's that. But yeah, if you've got a boring tasks for them and you're overloading them, watch out, because they're going to leave.
Well, thank you again for taking the time. Is there any social media or anything, if people want to follow you, that they can go to?
Yeah, for sure. I'm on Twitter, and what is my Twitter handle? I don't even know what that is. I think it's at Michael D. Mullen, D as in David. Yeah, that's right. I got that right. Yeah, at Michael D. Mullen on Twitter. You can look me up on LinkedIn as well if you want. But yeah, I love Twitter. Especially if you're in games, or if you're aspiring to get into the games industry. I mean, Twitter might not be right for everybody, but just follow people on Twitter and follow what's happening there, and because there's just so many exciting people on Twitter. And you read Polygon or Destructoid, you're not going to learn about the really exciting stuff happening in the games industry. You need to go on Twitter and really dig in and see what the little guys are doing. Go to the website Itch.io and look at all the game jam games on there, because there's so much creativity, so much crazy stuff.
Well, again, thank you. Make sure you guys go check them out on Twitter. I appreciate your time. I can't wait to. I'm actually in the process of upgrading my PC to handle VR, so I have to watch this. Once I get the Vive, I'll have to check it out and see what it's about.
Yeah, for sure. And like I say, the project we're working on is called Life of Us, and it's a musical interactive experience. Pharrell is doing part of the music. I'm sure it's going to be released on some other platforms fairly soon. So it's a story of evolution of life from single-celled amoebas all the way to the robotic future. So you'll see this. You might see something written up about this. So check it out. And, hopefully it'll be a gigantic success. We'll see.
Yeah, I can't wait, and maybe we'll do a video reviewing it. Give it kind of my standout. Check out my new virtual reality desktop video.
Totally, man. I would love that. That would be great. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you again. We'll have to do like a follow-up interview down the road.
I would love that, man. Thank you so much for having me on. This is really fun.
Yeah, I appreciate it, and extend to any developers or anyone else, if they ever at your company. I'm always looking for interesting people who can kind of share their knowledge with, us lowly junior devs and aspiring junior developers.
Okay, cool. I'll do that.
All right. Thanks.
Awesome, buddy. Take care.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
All right, guys. So that was Michael Mullen, project manager at a virtual reality company. I hope you guys enjoyed that. It was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. I've known Michael for a short little while. We don't know each other super well, but we did go to hackathon together, so we're basically brothers. I don't know if you guys know that, but I had a ton of fun talking with him. I hope you guys learned about what sort of things to learn about project management. Some of the takeaways, in my opinion, sort of tools that are pretty commonly used would be Jira. Basically a ticketing system. It's part of the Atlassian suite. There's also Confluence, which is like a way of keeping track of your documentation. We didn't really dive into that too much, but we talked a lot about Agile and Scrum. These are all things that are going to be pretty crucial project management. or for what you've heard from Michael, I think the gist of it is really to be on top of it and be kind of everywhere without being overshadowing. That would be kind of the gist of project management, and just another horizon of one of the great jobs that are out there in the tech and software industry. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to be a developer. Also a great way to start to get your foot in the door as a developer as well. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. As always, don't forget to comment, like, subscribe, and share, and support a brother on patreon.com/coding tutorials360. And if you like this episode of Behind the Code, make sure to share it. And every Friday, we will have a new episode coming out. So if you like this and you want to see some more, every Friday morning, the new episode. If you're looking for something to look at, last week's episode, we did an interview with Ethan Totten, who is a PHP developer, and we talked about PHP in 2017. So go ahead and check that out. And the week before that, we talked about coding in the UK. Lots of great stuff. Always looking to talk to interesting people. And I hope you guys enjoyed this. Thank you for watching. And special thanks to our sponsor, Dev Mountain. If you're interested in a coding bootcamp, why don't you check them out, where they include housing alongside their tuition so you can get up, go, and immerse yourself in the environment. If you want to support me, go over to patreon.com/coding tutorials360 so we can put out more content. Thanks for watching.